Okay, honestly, now it's just silly. So I had to update Twitch and update all the tags and everything, and it still took longer to get YouTube up and running than it did Twitch. It's fine. This is fine. Anyway, uh, welcome back, everybody. For those of you who are just joining me, I am Beth Wagner, and I am currently reading my dad's manuscript. This one, I'm reading a lot of them, so this is just the most recent one. It's called "The Dance of 100,000 Steps," and it's a trying to describe it. It's like flintlock fantasy. That's my go-to, my snap go-to for it, because I don't know how to describe it in any other way because it's got elements of uh, of like westerns in it, and it's definitely in the age of gunpowder. But here, let me just read the quick part of the synopsis. I'm gonna probably just read this part of the synopsis for the whole entire. Anytime I need to do like explain quickly what this is about. This is a story of Jerry Wesson, a spy assassin on the run in a world where magic combines with gunpowder powder age technology. There you go. That's the log line. Anyway, for those of you who are just tuning in, this is actually chapter 4, so you'll want to go back a couple little ways if you haven't already listened to previous broadcasts. If you have, then great. Just also another warning is that I am going to be editing as we go. So my head might be down and there might be pauses in the conversation. That's because I'm reading or I'm like busy marking up. And there's been a little bit of markups I need to do. So we'll see. It's a long one. And you know, I want to see where it goes, but I'll do more of a almost third of the way recap tomorrow night. And I'm just gonna probably do that at the end of each week as I go through. There's only 18 chapters, so we're on chapter 4, if that tells you anything. All right, so without further ado, enough rambling. Here I go. I continuing on the story. Well, I'm going to do a quick recap on that because otherwise I'm completely lost in the story here. So when last we left off, Jerry was working for a clockmaker. Alrighty. One day he handed me a package. This is done. Run it over to Nicholm Cad Tervalk and be careful with it. It's worth more than most. It's got one of those newfangled magic power movements. No winding of springs or pulling of counterweight chains here. Tried and true methods aren't good enough for them anymore. Achenbald, Achenball, OD, was known as a master craftsman and would have been better patronized if it weren't for his personality. He didn't much favor innovation, unless it were an innovation that struck him as useful, or one he himself had discovered. When customers demanded a particular innovation he disagreed with, he often refused, or agreed so grudgingly that it was clear he thought them wrong-headed for even asking. Not the way to win customers, or even keep old ones. It wasn't unusual for him that he disliked magic powered mechanisms, though he had sufficient business sense to realize that they were the coming thing, and he had to use them, like them or not. In part, I agreed with him. The little spell canisters that were used to power the clocks were not all of equal quality, but they were part of the clock. So therefore, if they failed, the fault was laid with the clockmaker, not the person who had supplied the powering mechanism. It can be galling to see your reputation suffer, and suffer for something which you had no over which you had no control. I, however, I was happy to leave off trying to find something to be cleaned in a now spotless shop, and have a chance to get out into the air, even the air of the city. I carried the package under my arm and walked briskly along the road. I suspected they had been watching well before I left the shop, waiting for someone to leave carrying a package. It was just luck that it was me delivering a package, not a customer picking up his purchase. They stood out, of course, to anyone who knew what to look for, and though I was out of the spy business, I hadn't given up watching out for myself. As I expected, they waited until there were few people around. Then there was a sudden rush of feet behind me. I was already moving. A heavy man, jowly and florid, was swinging a club at my head. I caught the wrist in his downward swing and redirected the motion to my right and down, sending him staggering and eventually falling onto the cobbles. The second man, of much the same shape and build, was about to step behind his partner, was about a step behind his partner, and I lifted a foot into his crotch, putting him down as well. I kicked him in the head to put him out, and turned to the other man who was just beginning to struggle to his feet. He was on his hands and knees when I kicked him also in the head, and that was the end of it. I did consider killing them off immediately, but it was too possible. Here in Karlstradren, Karlstorden, the self-defense in a robbery might be taken as manslaughter during a brawl, particularly with me being a foreigner. Besides, I preferred to stay out of trouble right now. I made my delivery and made a point of not going back the way I'd come. I mentioned the incident to Achenball, just so he'd know they'd been watching his shop. It was possible that the constable, const, constabulary, 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 I can say it, I promise, would be willing to do something about the situation. It's those magic movements, he groused. They knew they could get a good price for it. Magicians with a lot of theory and not much power can use the things to cast spells they wouldn't otherwise think of. I nodded and made an agreeing noise. Things were too new to have been covered in the smattering of magic training I'd gotten. It seemed, though, I could be wrong, that they were on the same lines as that little device I'd used to slow down the musketeers back in Raylan. Anyone could use those spheres. Just pronounce the right word or phrase to set them off. The spell canister seemed to be a little more sophisticated. The spell canister seemed to be a little more sophisticated, though, in that it allowed only a continual trickle of magic, just enough to power the clock, or whatever. To my mind, the thieves didn't care how the clock was powered, just so long as they could sell it for a quarter mazer or so. I was in the habit of supplementing my income with a bit of card playing. Mostly I played Knight, the game where you try to come as close to the total of 21 as possible without going over. I have a very good memory, so I had that little bit of an edge, knowing what cards were showing and what I was likely to get. It didn't mean I never lost. Sometimes the cards just didn't fall right. It did help me, though, to keep from pushing a hand that couldn't win. I didn't get rich, but I did pick up a few masters from time to time. Not only that, but it got me a chance to find the gossip, what the average people thought. As he pulled in his winnings one evening, old Cat Falkturn said, "You know how old Dogbase isn't happy with the prince? They say he might even disinherit him." Dalkey frowned, looking over his shoulder for non-existent eavesdroppers. "Watch what you say, old cat. Even using the wrong nicknames is enough for the Snoops." Old Cat shrugged his big shoulders. "Who's going to turn me in, Dalkey? You? Jerry? Maybe I'll turn myself in for the reward." "No, don't be stupid. Don't get in the habit of loose talk. And anyway, who'd, who'd the king put in Convetch's place?" "The younger brother, Vlad." "Vlad?" Dalkey laughed out loud. "Vlad the harp player? 5 hollies, that's a good one. I'll admit it's a stretch." Said old Cat, beginning to deal. "But it seems Prince Convech, Convec, Convec? Sorry. It seems Convec has been, seems Prince Convec has been making a lot of friends, mostly young nobles. They're muttering in their cups that old Dogbase is real too long, that he's getting senile." "Now you're getting really dangerous, old cat. You see the Hralstorden Watcher? They're saying how the king is extremely hale and fit for a man of his years. And as the broadsheets say it, that's what they want us to believe. And you know blazing well what anyone that anyone saying anything else is likely to be swung." "Ha! I'll say it again, Dalkey. Who's going to tell him?" "I'll take a card, old cat. And you know blazing well that all it takes for the wrong word to be said in the all well, that all it takes is for the wrong word to be said in the wrong place, and they'll look up who all your friends are and take them too." From the things I'd seen and heard, the authorities hadn't arrested as many as were rumored, and most had been sentenced to prison. Some had been hung, and the hangings were always noted in the Hralstorden Watcher. And again, that number was less than rumored. Of course, the population was mostly illiterate, so the broadsheets didn't reach anywhere near all, leaving a wide field of room for rumor. Oh boy, I can't talk today. Just before I'd been with Achenball for a month, a rough-looking pair came into the shop. Just a second here. They wore black jackets and trousers, both they and their clothing looking worse for the wear, and each wore a black felt hat. "Good afternoon, sirs," the dark one said, while the blonde one just looked around appraisingly. "We've come to collect the dues." His words were polite, but everything else about him was a sneering threat. Achenball gave them sneer for sneer, took a couple of silver coins out of the cash box, slapped them on the counter, and said, "There you are. Now be off." The blond man picked up the coins, taking his time about it, put them in his pouch. "Good to be doing business with you, sir," said the dark-haired spokesman, "and a good day to you both." Archibald managed to keep from saying anything more as they strolled out of the door. He gave them time to get out of earshot, then said, "Sons of bitches! Don't we pay constabulary fees to prevent that sort of thing?" "Indeed we do. And the yellow-haired scoundrel who said so little, he's one of the constables. So you can guess what would happen if we reported them." No, it wasn't surprising. The constabulary Even in that rush, were not highly paid. Was it any wonder that some, even many, would hire themselves out to this or that criminal chief? A small notion began forming in my mind. I'll be back shortly, I said, and was out the door before Archibald could begin to shout. Well, almost before anyway. Back when I'd had a lot of special gadgets to aid me, it would have been easy. As it still wasn't too difficult. Some of the dance techniques helped, such as the ones that helped me to seem like a harmless part of the environment. The collectors worked according to my expectations, stopping at every shop on the street. 3 blocks over, I made my move. I walked up quickly, overtaking them just as they were passing the mouth of an alley. I rammed the one on the outside, and he staggered against his partner, sending him staggering into the alley. I brought the bottom of my fist down on the back of the neck of the one I'd hit before he had time to get his balance, and he fell flat in the alley. The first one had caught himself against the wall of one of the buildings flanking the alley. I caught my foot, hooking his legs out from underneath him. Then I kicked him in the chin as he landed on his backside. The next thing to do was to go through their pouches. I took half of what they had, left quickly, but not at a run. Most people in this neighborhood wouldn't try to interfere with a robbery in progress. But one of them might just pass on some sort of description to the constabulary. I walked back to the shop. And just what have you been doing? You don't suppose that I'll let an assistant go wandering off whenever he wants and come back again as if nothing happened? Something has happened. I put the money on the counter. I took it off those two, just down the street a ways. I'll be willing to split it with you, half and half. If you still want to dismiss me, I'll accept that too. It wasn't that easy. You brainless young idiot! You know what this means? It means they'll be back again and they'll teach us one of their little lessons, as well as taking the money back. They didn't see who it was, and I waited until they got away from here before I took them. Furthermore, I only took half what they had. Suppose they're honest thieves? They go tell their chief that somebody robbed them and took half what they had? He won't believe them. He'll take it out on them rather than anyone else. You think that helps a lot. In 2, 3 days, they'll be back, though. They'll be back through, collecting again. And this time, they'll add a little on top to make up what was taken the first time. That seemed possible. But then, there were a number of notions coming to me, none of which would likely please my employer. Give them a bit of their own money back and keep the rest. I'll keep half. Am I dismissed? No, I suppose not. Hard to get a good assistant. That evening, over cards with old Cat, Dalkey, and a couple others, I told about the day's events, leaving out my own assault and robbery. 2 fellows came into Archibald's this afternoon to collecting their monthly dues. Archibald was near spitting. Old Cat looked up at me. How about that, Dalkey? You don't like me talking about old Dogface here among us? You think it's any safer talking Chief Greenhead's business? Dalkey gave me a look, and a more worried one at Old Cat. Old Cat, you keep talking names. He looked at me again. Jerry, you're a nice fellow, but some things you don't talk about. If word gets back to the wrong place, you'll be in real trouble. Oh, sorry, forget I said anything. I had now picked up one important bit of information, though. I knew a name, Chief Greenhead. If I knew it right, and in the right places, it might even get me more. I could be patient when I had to be. One of my nebulous notions was beginning to take more shape. I continued to learn more about the clock business with Achenball, day by day, becoming a little bit more knowledgeable. In my hold on. In my time off, I kept my eyes and ears open, learning more and more about neighborhood doings. People didn't like to talk about Chief Greenhead, but his deeds and his reputation did come up from time to time. Rumor had it that he possessed a little bit of magical ability, and everybody knew he had bribes spread about so that even if the constabulary were forced to mount one of their occasional crackdowns, he would be warned ahead of time. He was also careful about just who was allowed to be targeted by his men, who numbered everything from extortionists to burglars. Certain members of the nobility were left strictly alone. Because of the stature and temperament, they would see a crackdown mounted. It was further rumored that some burglar or other from time to time would enter the wrong house, and that burglar, as well as his loot, was delivered in the dead of night, securely bound, to the front door of the victim. I investigated with a few magicians, those on the lower edge of the scale, the ones who might be more willing to say something risky. To try something risky. I selected Alf Kron Halsett. He was youngish, with a talent for finding. I don't know that word is supposed to be. With a talent for finding what kept him from starvation. There were some growls that without being he sometimes found without being hired, and kept the fine for himself. I knew that was mostly envy, but I wasn't naive enough to believe that it was all envy. He had pale skin, white hair, and dark brown eyes. When outside, he wore a broad-brimmed hat to protect him from the sun. His thin fingers always toyed with the hat brim as we talked. It was brown felt with a pointed crown, a crown just high enough to make one wonder if he was playing a subtle joke on those expecting the typical fantasy wizard. As a matter of fact, I have rarely seen a wizard outside of the theater who wore that sort of hat and robes. His clothing, a dark shirt and trousers, with the light-colored vest, was a bit cleaner than most of the people in our circle, and it made me wonder if he used a bit of magic to keep them so. So, he said, do I fulfill your expectations as a wizard? I don't know. We've barely met. He smiled, just a trifle. Ha, the word gets around. I understand you've already talked to two others and discarded them. Discarded? Perhaps too strong a word, and in any case, here I am, and here you are, talking to me. I see. Well, I wish to consult you regarding certain things. They usually do, and I require an eighth mazer, non-refundable, in advance, and the right to charge more if the consultation is sufficiently complex. Agreed. I slid an eighth mazer across the table. He picked it up, glanced at it, and slipped it into his wallet. So, speak, my child, and I shall fill thine ears with the wisdom of the ages. He was parrying one of the many actors who played the part of magician in the theater dramas. How difficult is it to discover the whereabouts of a particular person? That is, if we have nothing of theirs to connect them, only a name and a nickname at that. He leaned back slowly. Ah, this is much more of a challenge than find the Mazur I lost, or find Auntie MacBiggy's silver spoon, or whatever. A challenge, but not altogether impossible. And I assume that the person does not want their whereabouts known? Correct. And this is this person using magic to conceal their whereabouts? That is the rumor, yes. Better and better. Is this person using their own magic? That is also the rumor, though I wouldn't guarantee it. And if some wizard discovers their whereabouts, what will the reaction of this person be? On the order of flung his hands up theoretically. Oh my goodness! I had difficult I had difficulty restraining my smile. Actually, I think his reaction would be more vigorous. Aha! More vigorous. I like that as a description. It could cover anything from a cudgel across the back of the head to dangling by the toes over the fires of the netherworld. You understand then that such a task will be expensive? I expected as much, and you will understand that I don't have the riches of the kingdom at my disposal. He sighed theatrically. They never do. It would be nice, just for once, to have a client who would say, name your price. I have the riches of at least a small dukedom at my disposal. The first thing I shall require is one of the spell casters that are used to power clock. Spell canisters that are used to power clocks. A working one, mind. That should be possible. What else? He put on a mock sad face. You aren't even going to ask me how I know you have access to such things? I smiled. No, I wouldn't bother. I thought it was all part of a dealing with a magician of ability. You know, Jerry Wesson, you'll lose a lot of friends if you keep spoiling their fun like this. Now, as to money, I want 50 Mazers. I managed to bargain him down to 30, and I had the suspicion that I'd have had a cheaper price if I hadn't seemed so take it for granted he knew where I worked. So, he said, I suspect you don't have a spell canister in your pocket. I will therefore ask only one Mazer in advance. Again, non-refundable. When you have the rest, look me up again. And don't expect to change the price at the like at, and don't expect to change price at that time. Blah 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 blah. I suppose he expected me to lift one of the things from Rauschenball's shop, but I had no intention of fouling my own nest. Besides, Achenball didn't keep spell canisters in the shop. He considered them as an enticement to robbers. When he needed one, he sent a messenger to the supplier he dealt with. So I took along a good deal of my savings and visited the supplier myself. Even this was a risk, because if got back to my employer, Achenball would be certain I was about to set up a shop in competition with him. That would be, in his mind, worse than theft. So when I went to the supplier, a miserable elderly typist who wore a long robe, like that of a stage magician, only in a simple, now dingy with age, red, without decoration. He was bald, he leaned on a black thick stick, and had a bad disposition, but his products were of good quality. He was bald, he leaned on on a black stick, had a bad disposition, but his products were of good quality. That meant in the case of spell canisters, that he had a lower rate of sudden failures than other suppliers. His spell canisters were all one price, no haggling. So I paid my masters and took the brass wooden canister approximate length and circumference of my thumb. I thanked him, and he muttered about something about that could have been, "You're welcome," or "Go away," and turned away from me. "I assume," said Afgron Halset, "that since you have requested this meeting, you have the requisite payment?" I put them carefully on the table and slid them across. If you were delighted at the sight, he did a masterly job of concealing it. "And the person whose whereabouts you seek?" "The person known as Chief Greenhead. And what I want to know is the place where he is most often found." He allowed his eyes to go wide. "Aha! And you are sure you wouldn't want me to help you slip into the draftster and murder the king and his council? It might be a bit touchy safer." "You can't do it?" He frowned a little angrily. "I didn't say that. I can do it, but it'll have to be done carefully. He has some moderately skilled people working for him. And if he discovers me poking around, his reaction will be, as you said, vigorous." "How soon?" "This is the kind of thing I don't like to rush through." He held up a hand. "And before you say anything, it's also the kind of work I don't like to be dawdling over while I do it. I assume you'll assure me that you don't talk in your sleep, but I intend to live to a ripe old age, and that doesn't allow me to take such assurances. Come back tomorrow and wait for me. If I don't appear, it'll be because I've discovered by magic, means or otherwise, that someone's watching you closely." Right. He was right, too. Someone might have picked up my interest in the Chief Greenhead, careful as I tried to be about it. Who knew who they might talk to? Old Holton would say, "When you know for certain you're safe, that's when you should expect trouble." So I went carefully, watched my step and my company, and showed up the next day, fairly sure that none of the people in the common room of the inn were more of a danger to me than they seemed. Elfcron came in a little later and walked straight to my table. "The person you want spends much of his time at the Green Tea Inn. Whatever else, he has a sense of humor. Now here." He handed over a folded piece of paper. "This is the layout of the private room he uses. I can't guarantee the chairs will stay in the same places, but I'm fairly sure the table will remain where it is, to the right of the window, with Chief Greenhead behind it, his back to the wall." I took the paper slowly. "This is a little more than I asked for." His long fingers tapped the brim of his hat on the table. "I'm fully aware of that, but it takes no particular skill at divination to tell you that you don't intend to take him by surprise merely to wish him happy name day. It is, therefore, in my interest that you should succeed." I looked at the paper and back at him. "Wouldn't it be in your best interest to turn me over to Chief Greenhead?" He grimaced. "I won't claim unblemished integrity, but I do make some careful choices as to who I betray to whom. And Chief Greenhead is not on my to whom list. As a protestation of my worthiness, it was not unconditional, but I'd found that unconditional protestations of trustworthiness too often came from people who weren't that trustworthy. I left it at that and went on to the next subject. I assume that the room has some sort of magical protections around the doors and the windows, at least. Sighing, he reached into a pocket. He passed me a thin leather thong uh, on which was strung a polished black stone disc, both bases carved with symbols and words. I believe, though the writing was both carved with symbols and words, I believe, though the writing was like nothing I'd seen before. This is good for a week's time, though I suggest you use it within 5 days to be sure. There are magical protections around the doors and windows, but they are in the nature of warning devices rather than the sort of that cause physical harm. And don't hang around outside the window too long. And how much extra do I owe you for this? He smiled. It's nothing. More in the nature of a goodwill gesture. I may be able to get more work from you once you've wished Chief Greenhead a happy mating day. I nodded. Having a friendly magician to consult could be very useful in the future, in whichever track my plans ran. I thought Elfcron might have been subtly directing me towards the window of Chief Greenhead's room. I hadn't and wouldn't discuss my potential plans with him. If I were wrong about his trustworthiness, that would be a very final way to find out. Hmm. The window was a good notion, of course. Bursting in through a shower of glass and lead could give me an instant's reaction time. On the other hand, if they were waiting for me, taking shifts and holding pistols trained on windows, I might just be the one lacking in reaction time. 3 evenings later, I went to the Green Trees Inn. I was leaning on a wooden stick, which disguised a metal core. I wore an eye patch, less than clean clothing, and a definite limp. I sat there through most of the evening, getting perpetually drunker. After a while, without doing any obvious staring, I marked the lookouts. They noted me as well, though as a lone drunk, I was no more than a possible disruption to be dealt with by the innkeeper. I went to the alley 3 times to relieve myself, more unsteady each time. The fourth time, no one paid me the least attention. When I turned aside suddenly and went up the stair, bringing a chair with me, I still had a few moments before anyone reacted. I was halfway to the first landing before the shout started behind me, and going up the second set of stairs when the pursuit hit the stairs after me. I even had to wait a second for them to start up the second stairs before I threw the chair at them, aiming for the legs. I didn't want to see the results. Either they'd be favorable or not, and I had to use every instant I had. I dashed to the door where the Chief Greenhead and his people met and pounded on it. Fire! Fire! The whole place is going up! In an inn, of course, with cook fires going, and a good deal of spilled grease to give them fuel. The fire was a constant threat. The door jerked open. A bearded man stuck his face out. What? I jammed the butt of my cane into his stomach, two-handed. As he began to fold, I rapped him over the back with his head with it. I flung the door wide open and went in. There were 5 more of them, and whatever else happened, they hadn't been warned about me. Either that, or they ignored the warning. They were taken completely by surprise, and I needed no more than an instant to assess the room. One of them had just started reaching for his pocket. The large and muscular man behind the table was coming to his feet. My first step took me closer to the fellow who was just jerking up his hand from his pocket. I swiped him across the face with my stick. Bones cracked, and he dropped. I whirled and kicked another man in the groin, then slapped the stick down over his head as well. Another had his dagger out and was lunging. I caught his wrist and whirled to make his momentum slam him into the wall. The next dagger man was moving toward me, more carefully. I swung the stick at him, and he jumped back. Then I kicked out straight behind me and took another in the stomach. The dagger man was moving in again, and I took the stick, much as a sword, and lunged, catching him in the solar plexus. He was quick enough to reverse his movement, but it wasn't quite the disabling blow it might have been. The dagger man, quite canny himself, was watching my stick and trying to stay out of its range while looking for an opening. The man behind the table had already gone out a secret hinged panel behind the table. I couldn't go chasing after him with this fellow at my back. I took another sword lunge, catching my toe on someone's outstretched arm and stumbling. The dagger man moved in. I caught him by surprise when I suddenly regained my balance and whipped the cane across his wrist, then again across his face. Footsteps came in the door. I flung myself down and to the left, coming back up with a pistol that was protruding out of an unconscious man's pocket. One of the lookouts from downstairs was in the hallway, pistol in hand, taking in the carnage. That instant of surprise was just enough for me to fire the pistol. The other lookout from downstairs hadn't made an appearance, but I headed for the back wall, behind the table. The catch was a simple one, requiring a simple upward sliding of the candle sconce. The panel pushed open easily once the catch was moved. The room next door was dark, so I moved through the doorway at a crouch and 2 rapid steps to the left. No shots were fired, no daggers thrown, but the hallway door opened and a bulky figure went through. I grabbed a chair on the way across, flung open the door, and tossed the chair out into the hallway. The pistol fired. Splinters flew up in the air, and splinters flew as the chair was hurled sideways by the force of the pistol shot. I jumped through right after, facing the direction of the pistol. He came at me with the dagger. I batted it aside with the cane and kicked for his groin. He twisted so I only caught the outside of his thigh, then slashed backhand at me. This fellow had clearly kept his people in line through more than mere fear. I swayed back from the dagger and managed to stab at his stomach with the stick. He got away from that one with only a scrape, then tried a kick of his own at my right knee. I pulled my foot back and caught his kicking foot with my right foot, throwing him off balance. He fell and rolled, coming to his feet so quickly that my kick at his head barely grazed him. He'd lost his dagger in the process, though. I was only overstretched for an instant, but in that instant he got me with a jab in the chest. Instead of desperately trying to maintain my balance, I let myself fall, and, as he had, rolled and came to my feet. He came at me as I was coming to my feet, kicking at my head. I had just let go of the cane, but I slapped his foot aside with my hand, putting him off for just enough time to get to my feet. He swung at my head again. I stepped inside, struck him in the face with my forehead, then caught his punching arm and whirled, throwing him across my back. He fell across the railing then and continued on down to the stairs. I recovered my cane and vaulted over the railing myself, landing on the stairs just above him. I needn't have bothered. Nobody could be alive with their neck bent at that angle. I went back through the rooms and found a strong box. It only took a moment to open that, and I took much of the money as I could carry. There was a lot of jewelry and the like, but I left that. Finding a place to sell it would be too much trouble. Not to mention, I didn't want to be selling stolen property. It didn't fit with my plans for the future. I went back downstairs. On the way, I passed one of the lookouts, still there cradling a broken arm and moaning. I rapped him across the head with the cane and left him unconscious behind me. He wasn't much of a danger, but sometime or other, Chief Greenhead's lieutenants would be looking to put themselves at the head of his band. One of the first things to do would be to see that the chief's killer didn't outlive him by much. And I didn't need someone to tell them which way I'd gone. As I expected, the common room was empty. Shouts and shots from upstairs, where Chief Greenhead had been known to make his headquarters. Had been known to make his headquarters, were the kind of thing to send people scattering. Da, da, da. Okay, so that's a little more adventurous. Kind of like that. Yeah. So yeah. This is a better chapter. This is a stronger chapter. I am going to be editing the other chapters, like over the next little while here. And yeah, it's heading in a good trajectory. I'm hoping for, well, and I'll talk more about that tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a good indicator of where this is going. But for now, I'm going to let you guys all go, and I'm going to talk to you tomorrow night. So take care.